Glad to see a great group of people participating. I see more people are logging in now. First, I want to welcome everyone to the Region 7 Town Hall. It was our every intention to travel with the executive board around the state to the different regions and have these meetings in person, but obviously we weren't able to do so. So the pandemic, COVID, derailed a lot of our initiatives, and this was one of them. But we felt that it was very important for us to have these meetings and have these conversations regarding some important options that we have for our profession enhancements. And with that, we will have this dialogue today. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge our executive director, Mike Linati, and his staff in our offices in Albany for their hard work during the pandemic. Mike and his staff made sure that our profession was well represented at the governor's office and continues to be a great line of communication for us. So I want to thank Mike and his team on behalf of all of our colleagues and our executive board. And without further ado, I'll turn our town hall over to Mike Linati. Michael.
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to see some familiar faces, albeit through Zoom, but technology is a great thing when it works. So hopefully it'll work for the entire call. It's worked so far. So just a couple of, I guess, housekeeping announcements before we jump into the session. Everybody, it looks like most people are on mute. If you aren't, that's fine right now. There's no background noise, but if we start getting background noise and you don't happen to be on mute, please mute your line until we get to the discussion portion. Just to let everyone know, this town hall, as all of our town halls, is being recorded. So even though so this way for folks who aren't able to join us right now, they'll have a chance to go on and listen to the recording at a later date. As I mentioned, all of them are being recorded. So if you happen to have an interest in hearing what some of your colleagues said around the state, you'll have an opportunity to do that as well. We plan to wrap up the town halls tomorrow afternoon. So soon thereafter, the recordings will be put up on the website for you. Last housekeeping announcement, we are scheduled for an hour, but we have no time constraints. So we can go for as long or as short as the discussion takes us. So what I'd like to do is do an overview for you on the two topics that we want to talk to you about. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. So just bear with me for 1 second. All right. So hopefully you're all seeing the PowerPoint presentation on your screen now. Before I jump into the overview, just a quick thank you to our sponsors who, thanks to their support, have been able to help us underwrite the cost of our town halls that we have been presenting. Just an overview of how we're going to approach our session today. So we will be speaking about two topics, one that we're referring to as paraprofessionals, the other alcohol and funeral homes. I will present about a 15-minute or so overview that'll give you some background information on the two topics, but the majority of our time will be spent having a discussion, hearing from you, both your comments, your feedbacks, and your questions. The goal is, as you see there, really just to obtain member feedback. This is one of the first attempts or venues that we are using to obtain member feedback on these issues. As I mentioned earlier, each region's having its own town hall. What we're going to do when we're done is we will consolidate all the feedback and we will present that to the association board for their December board meetings. I want to reinforce that there is no desired outcome from these discussions. There are no defined next steps or plans for the board or the association at this point. We have taken no official position on either of the issues we're about to discuss, nor has legislation been researched or drafted. The reason I bring that up is that, as you would probably know, if you're going to change something regarding the license structure or add something like alcohol being permitted in funeral homes, that would take a change in law. So that takes some time. So we are not at that point in the process. I wanted to just make sure you knew that. All right, so I just want to go through what I'm calling a chronology of what we've talked about in terms of the issues. So first I'll tackle the paraprofessionals piece. This really started back in 2015 with our Funeral Service Education Task Force. When I say started, I don't mean specifically conversations about paraprofessionals back then, but it was really a subset of the larger issue of the funeral service workforce that was being looked at and started with the Education Task Force. That task force's goal, as you see there, was to strengthen and elevate funeral service now and for the future. And they had 4 focus areas, or really 3 focus areas, I guess. Residency, education and curriculum in the schools, and continuing education and master certification. At the conclusion of their 2 years of work, they came away with a couple of recommendations, which you also see there. With regard to residency, their recommendation was to add a discernment period and to increase accountability and structure around the residency program. As a side note, just to let you know, that process is now nearing its final stages. We have drafted legislation to address that after speaking repeatedly with all the different stakeholders, including the mortuary science programs and the Bureau of Funeral Directing. So we do have legislation that is now ready to be introduced into the state legislature. With regard to the education and curriculum, there was a recommendation to propose a new curriculum for the colleges. And with regard to education and master certification, the recommendation was a new mandatory credentialing program and higher quality CE program review and approval. After that task force was done, a second task force was formed in 2018 under the then NYSFDA president. That task force worked for a year under the goal of exploring and implementing new programs to ensure a bright future for funeral service. In a lot of ways, it was a combination of a continuation, expansion, and extension of the work done by the task force. In terms of an extension or continuation, you can see their area of focuses there. It included residency and professional development, so 2 areas that the previous task force had started to look at. But then the expansion was really, as you look at some of those other areas, including recruitment, mentors, and paraprofessionals. In a lot of ways, this task force took a more holistic approach to the workforce issues, and that's hopefully depicted by that circle graph you see there. What they really looked at overall was the quality and quantity of the workforce. And they looked at it all the way from the high school students who might have an interest in attending mortuary science programs, all the way through to retirees who were obviously our licensed funeral directors who have now decided to step into retirement. And looking at that entire workforce chain, if you will, all the way around. In looking at all of that, at the end of their work back in June of last year, they came away with recommendations in all of the focus areas. What their recommendation was, though, was to continue the work that they had started in each of the areas. And the recommendation was to do so using a combination of work groups, task forces, and our Bridge Commission to address the different areas. More specifically, as it relates to the paraprofessionals, their recommendation was to create a new task force to continue their work. The association board, however, decided that prior to creating any task force or work groups, they wanted to have additional member input. So as Bill had mentioned at the onset of our call today, that was originally planned to be done through our regional meetings this past spring, but COVID has thrown a monkey wrench in a lot of our plans this year and required us to have to cancel those meetings, which have been replaced by these town halls. So that's going to be their way of getting input. Going back to the recommendations of this task force, the way they went ahead and did that was they actually divided themselves up into smaller work groups, and then they each took a deeper dive into each of the 5 focus areas. The deep dive into the topic of paraprofessionals was through an exercise that I want to walk you through now. What we did was we presented that work group with an assumption scenario and specifically asked them to address a question. So we said, assume that the association had received notice from the Department of Health that due to extremely low numbers of funeral directors in New York State, they had declared this with a public health issue. Further assume that they are now proposing a new license or certification be developed to address the workforce needs in funeral service due to the lack of the licensed funeral directors, and a determination that addressing this through additional newly licensed funeral directors not feasible at this point. That goes back to the mortuary science programs. So we said specifically, if that's the scenario you're presented with, what would your ideal job description and responsibilities be for this new either license or certification? So in looking at that and tackling that issue, the first question that the work group looked at was, I'll use the why and the what. So they said maybe a little differently, why is there a lack of funeral directors, and what needs to be specifically accounted for in creating these new positions? And what you can see as the answers to those questions is the list that's on the screen there. So in creating a new position or positions, the answers or the qualities, the responsibilities, the things you need to address would include sparking a career interest in funeral service, creating a pool of qualified workers, protecting families by ensuring they're only working with vetted and certified professionals, trying to counteract the shortage in the mortuary science programs by spiking an interest in being part of the funeral service workforce, to better serve families' needs, to respond to the changes of funerals being more involved and requiring more event planning and similar services, to help smaller funeral homes who might not have the wherewithal to hire a new fully licensed funeral director, but needs help, to help relieve owners and managers from some of the front and back office house operations, supplement the availability of funeral service professionals, enhance the role of the licensed funeral director through the creation of these positions, and prevent burnout, which is really addressing that work-life balance. So those are all the things that they wanted to try to tackle in any newly created certified position or licensed position. And the way they did that, after having the what and the why answered, was to move to the how. And the how is, what positions could you possibly create to address this? The group explored two positions that they have dubbed the certified funeral assistant and the certified funeral arranger. The important word on this slide to pay attention to again is explored. Again, I want to reinforce the fact that the task force did not recommend moving forward with either or both of these positions at this time. They simply recommended that a new task force be formed to continue the work that they had started. Now, all that said, they did spend a year, spent a lot of time and thought and dedicated a lot of energy and discussion towards these two positions and created a framework for both. So I would like to now spend some time sharing those with you, so that'll help us in terms of the discussion that we have today. It kind of gives us a foundation for our discussion. So what I'm going to do is walk through the duties of each position as part of a framework that they explored, as well as some of the education and training requirements. We're looking at the certified funeral assistant position first. The intention behind this position was to create something akin to the paraprofessionals in, say, for example, the dental industry or the legal profession. Dentists have hygienists, lawyers have paralegals. We also had heard from some previous on the town halls that the nursing industry has something similar in their profession as well. A certified funeral assistant, the framework proposed and looked at would include that that individual would only work under the direct supervision of a licensed funeral director, could only be employed by one funeral home at a time. In terms of duties they could provide, it would be to sign out and transfer the deceased from their place of death, to assist the funeral director with preparation, dressing, and casketing. However, they would not be allowed to transport the decedent to the place of final disposition over the concerns that you can see listed there. They would not be able to direct or supervise services, sign or amend death certificates, embalm, or conduct arrangements. The arrangements were addressed in the certified arranger position. In terms of the training and education, a framework could include an 8 to 12 hour pre-certification training program, followed by successfully passing a state recognized exam. The certification would come from the state of New York, and just like funeral directors, it would be every 2 years that you'd have to be recertified, possibly 4 credit hours per biennium, and a recommendation that both OSHA and ethics would be required classes amongst those 4. Switching over to the arranger, similar to the assistant, you would only be allowed to work for a licensed funeral director. You could only be employed by one funeral home at a time. This position, under the person employed in this position, would be allowed to make arrangements, collect vital information, coordinate and schedule final disposition, arrange for the care, preparation, and transportation of the decedent, and discuss and sell merchandise and services. However, they would not be allowed to sign contracts. sign or amend death certificates, or embalm, those functions would remain solely the right and responsibility of licensed funeral directors. With regard to their education and training requirements, a potential 20-hour pre-certification training program, which would include 25 hand-on arrangements and an overview of the embalming process, also passing an exam and a certification by the state, also a 2-year recertification process. In terms of the number of credit hours and all the topics to be covered, that was still to be determined, although they did feel very strongly that ethics should be one of the required classes that someone would take. So that's the framework, for lack of a better word, of the 2 positions and what the work group had put together during their time together. Right before, though, that they were ready to issue the recommendations in June, they had asked for some additional feedback. They wanted to know what members were thinking, so asked us to get some initial member feedback. So back in May, we did a member survey that posed a couple of questions on this topic to our membership. So I just would like to walk you through that now. We did share this back then, but again, it's been over a year. And since we are now talking about this topic, we felt it would be helpful to have this information as we begin our conversation in a few minutes. So let me walk you through some of the information from that survey. This just shows you the number of responses we got, as well as the breakdown of the positions from the people who answered them. The 239 represents about 25% response rate. What we do is we send links out to our member firms, which is around 950 each year. So those 239 responses is about 25%. I bring that up only because if you follow survey data compilation and results sharing, 22% is the percentage that is always cited as the response rate you need in order to claim that a survey is statistically valid. So take that for what you will, but if you follow that, then the survey answers we received allow us to rely on them as statistically valid representation of our membership. So let me just walk you through a couple of the questions and the answers. We asked our members if they were experiencing a shortage of qualified funeral directors available for hire. You can see there just about 44% said yes, just under 30 said no, and another quarter of them really said it wasn't applicable because they haven't needed to hire anybody recently. We asked our members if they were concerned about the workforce for the future workforce in New York State. And you can see a very strong percentage, nearly a little over 3/4 said yes, they were. About 13% said no. And another 10.5% said they haven't thought about it. You'll see a trend develop there in that last category from some of our respondents. We then asked them if they felt that we should continue exploring the topic of the license structure for service professionals in New York. You can see there just about 50% said yes, we should. Another 40-ish said no, and then that 10 to 11% that weren't sure, hadn't really thought about it. We asked them about both of those positions that I just described for you. However, we didn't give them all of the details that I just shared. We really gave them kind of a paragraph with a short overview of each position and some of the basic duties they perform. But based upon that information that we were able to share back last year, we asked if they felt it was worth continuing to explore those positions. So first, the certified funeral assistant. You can see there that 52% just about said yes. Another 37-ish said no, and there's that 11% that weren't sure. Flipping it over to the arranger position, about 35% felt we should continue to explore it. About 55% said no, and there's that same 10% that just weren't sure yet. So that really is the information that we had gathered and in the last several years of working in the area of the workforce and paraprofessionals, more specifically the last couple of years. Just before we open it up for a discussion, I wanted to share some information for you on alcohol in the funeral homes. There's really not that same level of information to share because that really hasn't taken place yet, those conversations and work group efforts. However, because this is also something that would require a change in law, and because we knew we were going to be having these meetings, we wanted to ask our members for some feedback on it to determine next steps. So alcohol in the funeral home would be seen as an expansion of the food and beverage law. It came up really last year in our governmental affairs committee meeting. It was raised in the context of having a champagne toast in honor of a deceased. Comment was something along the lines of the state law just simply prohibits alcohol in funeral homes. So it would be great when we have families coming in and asking to have a toast, whether it's your favorite beer, a Bailey's toast, a champagne toast, that we would be able to do something like that. But again, no real further action or due diligence had been taken since that time, other than it was put on the radar screen at that point. And we felt it was a good time to start asking for some additional member feedback before next steps. So that really concludes everything we wanted to share with you from the information or overview standpoint. As I promised, we're going to spend the majority of our time discussing this. So I'm going to shut up now and give you all a chance to provide your feedback, questions, comments. Really what we're looking for is information from our members about what do you think about these two topics? Do you still feel like we found in 2019 that these are worth exploring? Should we? Based on the frameworks that we just shared with you on those two positions, what do you think about that stuff? Do you like it? Have concerns about stuff? Are there other avenues that we should be looking at? Alcohol in the funeral home, again, kind of at first blush, kind of in its infancy stages in terms of discussion, pros, cons as to that, and what you'd like to see us do going forward. So with that, again, you can unmute yourself. It's not an extremely large group, so that should work. You can also raise your hand if you'd like, and I'll see that, and I can kind of pick people up and give them the floor. And then there's also that chat feature. So if you'd rather type your question or comment in, I'll be monitoring that and be happy to share that with the group. So with that, I will now turn it over to our members for their feedback. Greg, yes.
Can you hear me? Because I just unmuted. I'm on a phone and a video at the same time. Okay. So my question is, we're talking about paraprofessionals doing transfers, but at one point in the PowerPoint, it stated that they cannot transport to the cemetery. Currently, under our law, there is no requirement for licensed funeral directors to transport. Is there something going to go into effect that now eliminates this person that was able to do transfers from a facility or from a home to the funeral home now not be able to transport to the cemetery?
It was, and I'll defer to the funeral directors in the room, but it was my understanding from the conversations that took place that signing in at a cemetery was something that a licensed funeral director would be needed for. And that was something that they did not feel the funeral assistant would be able to do. That would still be something that only the licensed funeral director would be able to do.
Oh, I agree with that. But my question was that it mentioned transport. It didn't say, I saw the sign-in part, but also mentioned transport. I was just talking about the physical driving of the vehicle, not actually acting as a funeral.
Yeah, so that's just maybe the bad wordsmithing. It was the process of conducting the transportation, signing in, the interment whole process.
Understood. Thank you. That was my question.
You're welcome. Other comments, questions, feedback? Does anyone have?
Hey, Mike, Bill O'Brien, I'll just jump in. Good to see you, by the way, and a very brief but sincere thank you for your leadership this year.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, you know, we, as you know, the locations that are represented within the SCI team, we do support both of these initiatives. We have maybe a unique view of the use of these kinds of professionals and kinds of services by looking around the nation and the benefits. So the paraprofessional, you know, the need to bring so many people into the state during COVID to assist us was invaluable. And if we were able to handle that with folks locally, of course, we'd have to anticipate it. We probably still would have had to bring people in. In fact, I'm quite sure we would have. But the role became, the need for the role became very, very clear during the course of this year. I think it was clear prior, but this year it became crystal clear. With respect to alcohol in the funeral homes, your comment resonated with me. My father's service 4 years ago in another state, the ability to toast him at the conclusion of the service, the ability to gather with my family and have a glass of wine while we talked about him, looked at the photos, laughed and cried together, changed the whole environment for us. And the fact that it was somebody who came into the funeral home with a a license to serve alcohol, that there wasn't a single funeral director with a bottle in his or her hand pouring for anybody. It was people who went through all the training, carried the liability, were responsible for that, understand the nuances of over-serving and keeping an eye out for that. And the fact that the funeral home didn't have to worry about that, they were able to leave that to professional people who carry the insurance for it. Made it easy. But I've got to tell you, being able to finish that service by toasting my dad, it's very clear to me what it means to the families that we serve. And you know, I erase from my mind any worry about a spill on a carpet when I start to recognize what it means to those who come in. So thanks for this forum, Mike. I certainly support both initiatives.
Thank you, Bill. And you brought up a point that I think is important to bring up as well, which is, you know, our intention was to have this conversation in April. You know, we planned for this last fall, so no one knew what we would be experiencing this year when we put these plans in place. So the conversation, especially on the certified positions, was really going to be in the abstract or hypothetical in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, the conversation can take a very different turn now, having had so many of our funeral directors, whether you were downstate or even upstate, deputizing non-licensed individuals to help out. So that is something that I meant to ask, so I appreciate you bringing that up. Anybody who has had experience, if you deputized people, that's really helpful for us to know if that it was a positive experience for you, if there were things about it that you would want to see in any final version of something we might put forward, if there are things that weren't working that you would want to make sure we covered. Those kind of experiences, now that they were real time and real life, would definitely help us as we move forward in looking at these. So thank you. I forgot all about that and I meant to bring that up. So thank you. Other comments, feedback, questions? I have a couple in the chat, so let me just read those. Scott asked, could the credits for the certified funeral assistant eventually go towards for a mortuary degree? And Bill mentioned that's a great concept. Yeah, I would agree with that. The goal in I shouldn't say this, I don't want to speak for the task force, but from being part of those meetings, while those conversations were going on, you know, one of the goals, and you saw that in the needs list, is to get more people interested in funeral service. So in a lot of ways, they talked about this as potentially a stepping stone. Maybe someone isn't ready to commit to mortuary science school yet, but they have a real interest in the funeral profession. So this would be a way to, for lack of a better phrase, put your toe in the water, experience it. And if you really liked it, to take the next step. So if some of the certification was set up the right way, absolutely. It's almost like transferring credits from, you know, a community college to your 4-year degree. So if we can structure it that way to make it easier, especially with people with experience, it makes all the sense in the world. So definitely part of the concept that's consistent with the train of thought of the work group that was talking about this framework for these positions.
Mike, I'm going to share some information and maybe it'll get some people, their juices flowing for this dialogue. So one thing that we know is that 49 of the 50 states all allow for basic food and beverage in the funeral home. What we may not know that is out there is that 46 of the 50 states allow for alcohol consumption in the funeral home. Now that happens on 2 levels. Either one could be a state that has specific legislation that allows the funeral home to provide alcohol under the right conditions. And the other is that states that do not have that legislation, the funeral home, just as a business, would make the proper applications and get the proper licensing to afford their families that alcohol. So that's some information regarding alcohol in the funeral homes. The other information that came to us real time from, I believe it was a participant in Region 2, spoke about the amount of students that are in the mortuary science programs and how many students are actually graduating. And Mike referred to this during our 10 o'clock regional meeting, is that there were currently 44 students in the class at Hudson Valley, yet they only graduated 6. And so we're not seeing a tremendous amount of people that are taking that next step to get licensed. This is an opportunity for us, you know, just like We talked about the paraprofessionals, paralegal or paramedic. A paramedic does not devalue a doctor, and a paralegal does not devalue an attorney. So if anything, it enhances that profession.
So as I mentioned, if anybody does have some experience having deputized someone and they would like to share that, we would really love to hear that. Steve Dranow, if I butcher somebody's last name, I'll apologize in advance. I should know better too, because people always butcher my last name, but so Steve says, it has worked well in New Jersey, and this seems like an upgrade and even more professional. I am in favor. So thank you for that, Steve.
Hey, Mike, Jim,
I'll just speak to being an officer sitting in on many of the regional calls that we've had already. Many of the firms in the north had expressed a desire that this paraprofessional should definitely be able to work for them. The lack of qualified directors or the wherewithal to be able to hire them. So they thought this would be a wonderful resource for them to be able to continue serving their families. I know being where we were located in Queens, down in downstate New York, with the deputizing of the professionals that we had, I mean, I think this would definitely give us an introduction to how the process would definitely work, having those additional resources, and this taking it to the next level of having them trained, certified to be definitely could be helpful. God forbid the time we need, or maybe we don't need them at this current stage right now, but moving forward, we might be looking for that additional help as well.
Thank you. So I saw James and Greg and Carrie, so I'll go in that order if I may. So James.
ladies first. Carrie?
Oh, I'm just wanted to say we deputized, I think, five directors who came from other states during COVID at my locations. It was the only way we could have handled the uptick of calls. And they turned out to be a great help under the direction of my 5 directors. Really, it was the only way we could continue.
Thank you.
Mike, Jim Torellis. This January, I'll be a licensed funeral director for 43 years. And during those 43 years, I've seen some great strides that we took as a profession. I remember back in January of 2017, when we had the ability to serve food in the funeral home. It was such a monumental thing. I was involved with a location recently that it took us 6 months to hire a licensed funeral director. And not because of the person was not qualified. It was simply because no one was really knocking on the door looking for a job. So to have the ability of a paraprofessional to do a simple task as transfer remains will really be a great benefit to the funeral industry in the state of New York. And I gotta tell you, between the alcohol, I've had several times a family say, we would love to have an event in your chapel. Can we bring, can we have wine? Can we have beer? Can we have alcohol? And we tell them, no, we can't. But they said, okay, we'll go to another venue and do that, where we could help them and service this family at our location. So I am so excited to hear about these 2 initiatives, and I strongly support both of them. And I'm excited about the future if it goes through. So good luck to the state, and thank you for the state for bringing this up.
Thank you. Greg.
Thanks, Mike. We here at Hellman's had 2 of our SCI associates, one from Texas and one from California here. They were deputized. They had a fire in their belly that I never seen in other associates. Even here, they were gung-ho. These guys did not. They were here each 2 weeks apiece. They didn't want a day off. They didn't want any time off. They wanted to be here as long as they can. And if that means that others in this state are going to be equivalent to these 2 gentlemen that were here, I'm 100% for this. They had a fire that I've never seen. They had a zeal and a want to help us. We had a tractor trailer refrigerator truck here at Hellman's, full. Our refrigerator in the funeral home at that moment was in the process of being upgraded from a 5-person cooler to a 12-person cooler, and we still didn't have the room here. But these 2 guys were awesome. I mean, I couldn't say one bad thing about these guys. And if we're bringing this into our field here in New York, definitely, I'm with Jim and probably everyone else on here that this is the way to go.
Thank you. I do have another chat comment from Ambrosio. I certainly support both initiatives. The use of deputized employees was invaluable, especially when the demand for licensed funeral directors during the peak of the pandemic. So very consistent with some of the other comments that you have shared with us.
Hey, Mike, just to round that out, SCI brought in 107 volunteers from 27 states. So you're hearing about little areas where that was, where we saw the impact of that, but it was amazing to see them come in. Greg spoke very eloquently about it, as have others. It was a big deal for us. And, you know, frankly, who was served, the community was served really well as a result of it. So we were thankful. We were thankful for the governor's willingness to allow that deputization, but to make it a permanent part of what we do, much better.
Great, thank you.
Mike, excuse me, it's Greg again. I'm just going to excuse myself. I have a funeral service that has to go for 3 o'clock burial. So I'm going to excuse myself.
Okay, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Anyone else, any comments, questions with regard to either issue? I'll also, since we have everybody on the phone, and I know that some of the conversation has turned towards some of the issues that, or how that's helped during the surge in the pandemic. If anybody has questions about anything that has been going on with regard to the pandemic, I know that there is some changes starting to come from the state, and there's some monitoring of the uptick in many parts across the state right now of positive cases. And also just to give a reminder, or actually a notice, that we are planning on November 5th to do a COVID webinar, another update call just on what's going on, what we're looking at into the fall and the winter, and just some reminders about some of the things that are still in place. So if you'd like to join us, we'll be sending out information, but just to kind of save the date for November 5th for information on that. But any questions or comments, concerns, anything about any other topic, including COVID, feel free, since we have a group of us together. I don't see anything right now. All right, so like I said earlier on, we have as much time or as little time as we need. I'm not gonna, we don't need to fill out the whole hour. Nobody's getting credit for this one, so I don't have to extend it for 10 more minutes. But however, I do want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to continue to provide feedback. You might think of something after we get off this call. So what I'd ask is, if you do have anything else you'd like to provide, please email me with that information so I can be sure to include it in the consolidated report we provide to the board. My email is pretty simple. It's mike@nysfda.org. So if you, again, if you have anything you'd like to share on either of these topics, please feel free to do so at any time after we log off. So before I do, I would ask one more time, anybody, any last comments, questions?
Mike, I have one question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I know people who wanted to be on the call today, but due to our industry and being a little bit busy, could not attend. Is it even though they're not in, say, Region 8, could they be on the Region 8 call tomorrow morning if their location is in a different region? If you
have them email us, then we can send them the link to that. So, because what we did was we sent the link to each members in the region. The other thing they'll be able to do is they'll be able to obviously log on to this and other recorded sessions later. But if there's somebody who really is just unable to meet today because of scheduling and would like to be on one of the calls tomorrow, just let them, have them email me or Kelly if they have Kelly's email address, and we can work with them.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep, sure.
So Mike, one of the things that Jimmy's referring to is that Joe, who represents us at Higgins, wanted to express his support for both of these initiatives. And if he's unable to get on, just let the record show that all 3 of those locations are in support of this, of both initiatives. He had to run out to the cemetery. He was on the very beginning of the call, but wasn't able to stay for the section on comments, but his support is clearly in place.
Okay, thank you.
Volume.
All right, I don't see anything else in the chat box, no
I got it.
hands were raised, so, so I just want to thank you all for spending time with us this afternoon, and before we log off, I will turn it back over to Bill for some closing remarks.
Mike, thank you very much. And again, a big thank you to everybody who participated with us today. Your comments, your positions are ultimately well received. Again, like Mike mentioned, if there's any questions or concerns that you have, don't hesitate to email us. You can email anyone on the executive board or Mike or Kelly, and we'll make sure that your thoughts are part of the actual record. And I just want to encourage everybody to please remain safe. Use the State Association as a trusted resource for anything that you need. And we look forward to seeing everybody very soon. So I thank you very much, and thank you for participating.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.